Hello YouTube and welcome back. I'm Nico and you're watching Dare to Game. Today we are taking a look at the 5 best episodes of Game of Thrones ever. I know that most of us have been disappointed with Season 8 so far, and this episode is being recorded before the season finale. So let's take a look back at some of the good times, when episodes were genuinely good. Keep in mind that this video will contain spoilers for all the episodes on this list. Duh. So let's dive on in. Number 5. Season 2, Episode 10, Blackwater. This episode is one of the first in the entire series to actually show a large-scale battle. As we all know, the plot here was Tyrion Lannister leading the defense of King's Landing against the attack of Stannis Baratheon. This episode has all sorts of goodies, including the tension and character development of the women in the Holdfast. This episode really starts to ramp up the show's indications that Cersei is a horrible person, and a terrible queen, if we hadn't already gathered that much. We get Sansa showing that she has some small amount of sense and stability for the first time in the series, and we get the first of many times that Cersei tries to kill one of her kids, this time being an unsuccessful attempt. But on the more interesting half of the episode, we see Tyrion strategizing and proving himself a competent military commander on the wall, and even leading a flank attack on Stannis' forces outside. We get to see Wildfire for the first time, wiping out the lion's share of Stannis' forces on the water. And we get a classic twist moment where one of Joffrey's men, Sir Mandon Moore, tried to kill Tyrion, only to be speared through the back of the head by Podrick Payne. We then have the combined forces of Tywin Lannister and the Tyrells under Sir Loras Tyrell, wearing Renly Baratheon's armor, charging in and defeating Stannis' forces and throwing them back into the Blackwater. All in all, a great episode and perhaps the best of Season 2. Number 4. Season 8, Episode 2. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Now I know it may be surprising to find an episode from Season 8 on this list, but bear in mind, this one was easily the best one of the season, and I'm willing to bet that that will hold true even after the finale. While there wasn't an epic battle or any giant twists or new characters being introduced, what we did get was a lot of closure for fan questions, continuations of old storylines. This episode is all about reunions, like Arya and the Hound, or in a different light, Arya and Gendry. But what this episode really gave us was all the character building we needed to so we could care about each and every one of these characters before the Battle of Winterfell. We finally got to see Bran's reaction, or lack thereof, to Jaime about that whole awkward window thing from Season 1, and Tormund explained why he has the surname Giantsbane, before gulping down an entire horn of what we are meant to believe is giant's milk. We get a little mob-style sit-down between Daenerys and Sansa, but I think everyone agrees that the best moment of this episode was when Brienne of Tarth finally got what she had always dreamed of, and that is a knighthood. In front of all of her friends and allies, Brienne is named Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by Jaime Lannister, which made her the first female knight ever, and echoed the title of Duncan the Tall, who is believed to be Brienne's ancestor. So, this episode was a rare hit for the writers in this season, and featured the best fan service and solid writing of the final season so far. Number 3. Season 3, Episode 9, The Rains of Castamere. This episode, also known as The Red Wedding, was a dark turning point for the series that really highlighted the gritty reality that the show used to strive for. While personally I do not think that every character needs to die, this episode showed that back in those days, any character could. There was no plot armor that could keep the people inside that castle safe from the cowardly and treacherous Freys. The death roster includes hundreds if not thousands of Northern soldiers, but more importantly, Catelyn Stark, the matriarch of the Stark family, wife to Ned Stark and mother to the rest, except Jon of course. And of course, Robb Stark's new pregnant wife, Talisa Stark, and their baby still in her womb. Lastly, of course, this episode also brutally killed Robb Stark, the king in the north. They shot him a bunch of times, much like his father, and then after finishing him off, chopped off his head and his direwolf's, and then staked his direwolf's head on Robb's body and paraded it around. As much as I hate what happened in this episode, at least it was done well. The writing and acting were solid. It wasn't dragged out, and there was enough tension and suspense to give the viewer a sense of dread through Catelyn's eyes as she figured it all out. This episode had stakes. As I said, plot armor couldn't protect the main characters in this one, and that is why it will forever be ingrained as one of the best, most memorable, and horrifying episodes of Game of Thrones ever. Number 2. Season 6, Episode 9, Battle of the Bastards. In the way that Blackwater was the first large-scale battle we saw on the show, Battle of the Bastards was the first ever example of a large-scale, semi-accurate medieval battle that we saw, and still, arguably, better than the Battle of Winterfell. For one thing, we could see what was going on, and for another thing, as bad as the tactics were, they were nowhere near as terrible as the ones of the Battle of Winterfell. This episode served as a fitting transition for Jon Snow into ruler and noble, and helped usher Ramsay Bolton off the show and out of existence. Despite the tactical flaws of the battle, it was still a very cinematically pleasing to watch. For one thing, there were like a dozen shots that looked like they were straight out of a high-budget Hollywood blockbuster, so the cinematography was on point. There were also emotional stakes, as many of the characters we have come to know, such as Tormund Giantsbane, Jon Snow, and Ser Davos, were many times in peril. Unfortunately, this is when the show had already started to skirt reality, and therefore these characters were actually never in any danger. With all of this in mind, the Battle of the Bastards has gone down in history as one of the best and most impressive large-scale battles in TV history. So before we go to number 1, we have some honorable mentions. Well, since this is a top 5 list and not a top 10, here are a few that were good but didn't quite make the cut. There's Season 7, Episode 7, The Dragon and the Wolf, an episode that marked a culmination of much of the character development of the story so far, with their mob-style sit-down in King's Landing. Then there's Season 5, Episode 8, Hardhome, the first episode to actually show us how dangerous and terrifying the Night King and the White Walkers are meant to be. Next we have Season 4, Episode 8, The Mountain and the Viper, which despite its flaws had one of the best instances of personal combat in the show, and some more great character development, and one of the most gruesome deaths the show has ever featured. Then we have Season 6, Episode 5, The Door. This episode served as a fitting end and an explanation for a fan-favorite side character, Hodor, and also gave us some of the most informational flashbacks in Bran's green sight. Lastly, there is Season 4, Episode 2, The Lion and the Rose, otherwise known as The Purple Wedding. This episode finally saw the end of Joffrey's tyrannical rule, when he was poisoned and killed by Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell. This episode delivered arguably the most satisfying death in Game of Thrones history. So, finally, number 1. Season 4, Episode 9, Watchers on the Wall. This episode was what made Game of Thrones really click for me. While much of the show up to this point was pretty good, Watchers on the Wall was the first episode to ever cross into standalone greatness, at least for me. It followed the trend that Game of Thrones had set up until this point, with the 9th episode, also known as the penultimate episode, being the one that really shredded expectations and gave us jaw-dropping visuals and epic storylines. This one, however, beats them all. Watchers on the Wall is the first and I think only episode to focus on only one location, that being Castle Black and that section of the wall. Not only is this episode the most entertaining battle sequence the show has ever offered, it is also the most accurate one in terms of tactics. They actually used their defenses to their advantage, and held off a much larger force because of it. They used giant swinging hooks to break sections of the wall to knock down wildling climbers, dropped barrels of pitch and lit them on fire. I think at one point they used a ballista to shoot a giant, not to mention that huge bow that Giant used to shoot the people all the way up on the top of the wall. Seriously, how cool was that? We also had the back of the wall at Castle Black being attacked by Tormund Giantsbane's force, which is the first time we really got to see Tormund in action. And he was an animal in this episode. We also had several deaths, including Ygritte in Jon Snow's arms after that little bastard Ollie shot her in the back. We also saw Pip die in Sam's arms after getting a neck piercing, and then Gren and his men defending the tunnel from a rampaging giant, so that was pretty badass. No matter which way you look at it, this episode was a masterpiece, and in my opinion, the best episode of Game of Thrones ever, bar none. Well, that's it for my list of the 5 best Game of Thrones episodes ever. Do you agree with this list? Let me know down there in the comments. But that's all for today. I'm out. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. If you did, I can assume you liked the content, and hopefully you'll subscribe and turn on the notification bell. If you haven't already, check out these links I have on the screen to see me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like my content and would like to support what I do here, there's a link to my Patreon account in the description, and a donation would be much appreciated. In any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day.